Welcome to the North State Breakdown with Benjamin Nguyen. Chris Street has become a familiar name in Shasta County. He was nearly appointed county CEO and recently was awarded a $40,000 contract to advise on building a healthcare facility without a competitive bidding process. But his ambitions extend far beyond our county's borders. Street serves in a leadership role with New California, a movement that argues California's government has failed and must be replaced. New California refers to itself as a provisional government, according to its official communications. It has proposed its own constitution, appointed its own officials, and outlines a strategy to gain federal recognition. But how did we get here? And why is someone with Street's background not only back in government, but shaping a blueprint that could remake it all together? Today, we're going to break it down, his history, his influence, and the movement building around him. Let's begin. Before Chris Street arrived in Shasta County, before the rhetoric, the revival, the reinvention, he was a financial official at the center of one of the more serious fiduciary scandals in California history. In 2010, a federal bankruptcy court ruled that Street had breached his fiduciary duty as trustee of the End of the Road Trust. The judgment? Over $7 million in damages. The court found that Street used trust funds to pay himself excessive compensation, finance luxury hotels, hire chauffeurs, and even cover cosmetic procedures, including Botox treatments. Judge Richard Nieder concluded that Street had depleted the trust and violated fundamental standards of oversight and transparency. Street later won a $10 million malpractice suit against his attorney, but the original ruling remains fully intact. The court never reversed its findings. He wasn't legally cleared of wrongdoing. He was compensated for his attorney's failure to defend him. The fallout in Orange County was swift. His political mentor, John Morlack, publicly called for his resignation. Street was strict of his investment authority. Instead of stepping down, Street doubled down. He held press conferences where he denied wrongdoings and blamed others for misleading the public.
The actions that I have taken both as a treasurer tax collector and the trustee of the End of the Road Trust, while taken in and after consultation with advisors, legal counsel, and staff, are ultimately my actions and my responsibility. In retrospect, and with the benefit of hindsight, I can honestly say that I stand by those actions despite the criticisms those decisions have generated, primarily because if you look at the criticisms, they're really more about style than they are about substance.
Street defended his record, reiterating that his office had performed well despite the court's ruling. Critics described his response as part of a recurring pattern: deny, deflect, reframe. Even years later, Street refused to let the case go. In 2012, he filed a motion for reconsideration of the court's judgment. The judge didn't just deny it. He called the arguments legally meritless, filled with irrelevant, verbose, and unconnected factual assertions. Street's new evidence, the court said, had no bearing on the original findings. It was the final word in a case that defined the start of his political career, not with reform or redemption, but with litigation and deflection. By the time Chris Street resurfaced in Shasta County, the headlines about fiduciary failure had faded from public memory. But the man who arrived wasn't changed, only rebranded. In early 2023, the Shasta County Board of Supervisors considered hiring Street as the new county CEO. When the news broke, local pushback was immediate. Investigative articles, online comments, and public concern mounted, according to local reports, as residents learned or were reminded of Street's financial history. The board withdrew the offer before it could be finalized. But Street wasn't finished. In February 2025, he re-entered the picture, not through a public hiring process, but via a $40,000 contract that was awarded without a public bidding process. There was no request for proposals, no formal process, and no recent or public sector healthcare experience. The contract came to public attention only after it was placed on the Board of Supervisors' agenda for approval. Why was he being brought in? What exactly was he advising on? And who decided he was qualified? If his role was justified on financial strategy grounds, that raises even deeper concerns. Given Street's documented record of fiduciary misconduct and his litigious nature, placing him near public budgets should have been a non-starter. Street took to the microphone at a Board of Supervisors meeting in April 2023.
I discovered that the county of Shasta, which is supposed to have a reserve of 17 to 25%, 25% target, 17% minimum, actually had a reserve of around 13.5%. So basically that was, $25 million short. And through the process of calling the auditor controller, Nolda Short, a very honest person and very straightforward person, she confirmed that my analysis that this was below the minimum, matter of fact about it. And she then said, oh, well, we also had a loan on July 22nd for $10 million, and I was absolutely stunned. Because the way it works in California under California Government Code 29086, it is illegal to reduce reserves after the budget is set.
The county auditor disputed his claims shortly afterward.
This is our general reserve, so this is the hot topic item lately. Right now it sits at 19 million because of the 10 million that we moved over. That 10 million is not a loan because there is no requirement to repay it. So we've moved it over to accumulated capital outlay, but accumulated capital outlay is not required to repay that money. Our policy, we do have accounting policy, and I'm going to go into the general reserve policy, does state that if we take money out of that fund at budget time, and we did do it during the budget process, so as far as I'm concerned, that was legal because we did it during the budget process, that we will return it in the same amount of time.
But the damage had already been done. That auditor was Nolda Short, Shasta County's elected auditor controller. And what makes this moment more telling is that Supervisor Kevin Cry, one of the board members closest to Street politically, has repeatedly called her his favorite public official.
It's like I just saw my favorite elected official, Nolda Short. When I have a question about numbers as it relates to the county, I go to Nolda Short. The longer I've worked with her, the faster she can tell me something, and I don't have to even fact check it because I know it came from Nolda and it's exact.
So when she pushed back on Street's allegations, it wasn't just a bureaucratic formality. It was a direct, data-backed rebuttal from someone he's publicly called credible. Chris Street's reemergence in local politics wasn't just about Shasta County. It was about something much bigger. A second act as the vice president of New California State, where he became the chief architect of a radical financial narrative. His primary weapon? Fear. In New California public calls and Zoom meetings, Street paints an apocalyptic picture of the state's economy. He calls California structurally bankrupt, claims it's on the brink of financial collapse, and has suggested in multiple public calls that the federal government could cut off billions in grants due to the state's mismanagement. During a January 26, 2025 New California Zoom call, Street issued this stark warning.
As I said, every insured person not in the FAIR plan in California is going to be subject to about $7,300 cost. They'll spread that out over a number of years, but you as a person living not in Southern California are going to share in paying for this loss.
So everyone in California?
Yeah. So your insurance is going to be high to pay back that $7,300.
No documentation, no citations, just numbers delivered with confidence. Later in that same call, a participant asked,
so regarding the insurance thing, when we become New California State, have you actually talked to any insurance companies that would be willing to come back to our New California State, or are we going to, are you lining people up is I guess what I'm asking.
I expect to get 40% discounts to go on immediately.
Oh!
He did not name any insurance carriers, cite negotiations, or explain how the discount would be implemented. The number stood on its own, confident, specific, and unsupported. Street uses the language of economics to legitimize radical politics. Every claim he makes leads back to one message: California is doomed, and only New California can save you. This is a common tactic in political movements. Amplify economic anxiety with confident, number-driven predictions, then frame radical change as financial necessity. In Street's telling, there's no room for gradual reform or democratic processes. There is only collapse, and the solution is not a vote, it's a replacement. Chris Street's voice doesn't stop at podiums or Zoom calls. It extends into print through mountaintop media, a platform that critics have stated performs more like government-sponsored news rather than a reputable source of information. It's where economic alarmism is repackaged as commentary and used to promote the movement's ideological goals. Street's articles on Mountaintop Times follow a tight script, grim headlines, confident tone, and conclusions that always lead to one thing. California is on the brink of disaster. Here are just a few examples. In one article, Street claims that a federal spending review caused an immediate crisis for California alone, while the rest of the country remained unaffected. That sense of California as economic outlier, and a failed one at that, runs through much of Street's writing. In another article, he goes further, describing the state as outright insolvent and almost entirely dependent on borrowed federal money. And even when there are surpluses, Street casts them as temporary illusions, the product of short-term gains rather than responsible budgeting. In this piece, Street argues that even the windfall from tech sector capital gains taxes isn't enough to save California from structural deficits. The through line in all of these articles is clear. California is presented as broken, bankrupt, and on the edge of collapse. A narrative Street repeats not only in local forums, but in every medium available to him. This rhetoric isn't new for Street. Back in 2009, as Orange County Treasurer, he appeared on Fox Business predicting a U.S. credit downgrade.
But instead of fixing a broken model, as you have said, California wants a federal cosigner. They want us, people who don't live in California, the federal taxpayer, to underwrite California's debt. Tell us about that.
Well, that's very dangerous, David. You got to understand that California is really where the United States is headed. Every state can find the same excuse, can spend the same amount of money proportionately that California does, and then run to Congress and ask for a bailout. I'm concerned that if California gets a bailout, every other state will want that bailout. And what happens to the United States when our AAA credit is downgraded? That's a slippery slope that we don't want to go.
The message was clear. Catastrophe is coming, unless leadership like Street can change course. But Street isn't the only architect of this rhetorical ecosystem. Paul Preston, the founder of the New California movement and its self-declared governor pro tempore, isn't just a political figure. He's the ideological nucleus of the entire campaign. Preston blends constitutional rhetoric with biblical framing, positioning himself as both a strategist and moral leader. In an April 2025 episode of Mountaintop Media, in a recorded interview with Leslie Sawyer, Preston made the following claims.
As we, the people, have determined that the state of California is a communist state, period, end of subject. We're a one-party system. The evidence is obvious. It's uniparty. You've probably heard that before. And being a uniparty, what you are, is you have one political system, one political ideology. So we join the ranks of North Korea, China, Cuba, Venezuela, former Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. There's California now. We're one of the one-party states. So this is, by its own definition, totalitarianism. So that brought us to another way of getting into statehood, and that was, of course, with the West Virginia model of 1861, which meant that we cannot work with the California legislature, nor should we. The law is very clear, constitutional law is very, very clear, that we should not work with communists or totalitarians. How can we? It's impossible.
Right.
And so the ideologies just don't match with a Republican form of government. So we've taken it upon ourselves to declare California in the state of default.
In a February Zoom call, New California leaders also laid out a 5-point petition to federal authorities calling for sweeping actions, including emergency powers and direct recognition.
2025, New California State has requested of President Trump that the great state of New California has requested of our president to A, invoke the Federal Insurrection Act of 1807, B, the Emergency Economic Powers Act, C, recognize the reorganized government of California, D, declare the Mexican cartels to be terror, and E, carry the great state of New California Admissions Act.
It wasn't a traditional legal strategy. It was a request for executive action that would skip standard constitutional processes. Mountaintop media functions less like traditional journalism and more like an advocacy outlet for local politicians and their personal interests, including New California. For that, Chris Street is one of its most prolific contributors. By now, the vision of New California may sound fringe, but perhaps the most surprising critics aren't progressives or mainstream commentators. They're the founders of the State of Jefferson movement. On April 13, 2025, the weekly radio program Jefferson State of Mind aired a broadcast that delivered a scathing takedown of Paul Preston. Longtime Jefferson leaders Janet Chandler, Terry Raposa, and Mark Baird didn't just express concern.
I don't know how that's Republicanism, because I was not given a ballot.
Okay, so let me get this straight.
They weren't on a ballot, were they?
Yeah.
Not on my ballot.
I think that there's supposed to be an election happening for New California, and you're going to go and you can vote for somebody for your state senator and your state assembly person in New California, but you have to show ID to people who you don't even know who are putting together an election for a state that doesn't exist. Where's the capital? Is it a P.O. box?
And where do you go to vote?
Their critiques weren't ideological. They were structural. Chandler dismantled Preston's frequent invocation of the West Virginia model.
He keeps talking about the fact that they are going to do their state split based on the West Virginia model. Well, if you know anything about history, West Virginia left the state of Virginia when Virginia seceded from the Union. They seceded. They politically, officially left. They departed. So Paul Preston says that because of the bad things that California has done, they are in a state of insurrection. And therefore, New California has the right to leave Old California. Well, the problem with that is, no, California is not in a position of insurrection.
Mark Baird, one of the Jefferson movement's original legal strategists, was even more direct.
The conservatives seem to manifest every single time someone tries to do something good. And then there's an ego that gets involved, and that was Paul. He had a pretty big ego, still does, apparently. And he just wanted to be king, and here he goes. And if there are people that are dumb enough to believe this hogwash, I don't know what to say to them.
And when the group discussed New California's draft constitution, the alarm grew louder.
Here's one for you. In the New California Constitution, all current legislators and representatives will be banned for life from holding office in New California.
Say that again real slow, because that is almost hard to believe. So he is saying that he has jurisdiction over the freedom of these people. Go ahead.
Yes. In the New California Constitution, all current legislators representing the state of California will be banned for life from holding office in the state of New California, which sounds extremely totalitarian to me.
Wow.
The Jefferson movement, while ideologically distinct and often controversial, built its campaign around public process, signature drives, legal filings, town halls. New California, by contrast, has skipped all of that. And when those who helped pioneer secessionist thought in California are sounding the alarm, it raises a simple but crucial question. If this isn't what they fought for, then who exactly is it for? Say what you will about the Jefferson movement, they've stayed committed to legal process, public accountability, and electoral legitimacy. That alone puts them in a different category from the shadow regime forming under Chris Street and Paul Preston. Preston has openly stated his intent to repeal Reynolds v. Sims, the Supreme Court case that guaranteed one person, one vote.
We're going to give representation now back to your counties. Every county
Right.
will have a state senator. That's the way the Constitution wanted it to be. Reynolds
Right.
versus Sims destroyed that, and we're bringing that back.
That structure would give Lassen County, with a population of 30,000, the same power as Los Angeles County, with nearly 10 million. It's not a formula for representation, but for entrenching rural dominance. This is not a design flaw. It's the plan. This isn't just secession. This could be described as sedition in slow motion. They aren't imagining a better government. They're constructing a parallel one, where control replaces consent. And they're testing it right now, in meetings, in declarations, in podcasts, and in public contracts, like the one awarded to Chris Street right here in Shasta County. This isn't theoretical. This is a blueprint in motion. Now, this isn't just a story about New California. It's a story about Shasta County and how our institutions are being used to legitimize a movement that doesn't believe in them. Chris Street's rise in Shasta County wasn't accidental. It was a reflection of the county's shifting political priorities. This county, our county, is being used as a test case, a staging ground, a soft launch for something far more destabilizing. And if we don't push back, if we don't demand transparency, accountability, and adherence to actual law, we risk becoming the first county captured by a political fantasy masquerading as a plan. Street and Preston represent a movement that has repeatedly shown disregard for elections, transparency, and accountability, favoring power claimed without consent. If we normalize this, we don't just lose trust in government, we lose control of it. And that's the breakdown.